Section 15 of China, Japan, and the Islands of the Pacific. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jim Locke of Floyd, Virginia. The World's Story, Volume 1. China, Japan, and the Islands of the Pacific. Edited by Eva March Tappan. Section 15. The Strenuous Reign of Huang Ti by Reverend Charles Gutzlaff. In spite of all the good advice of Confucius, Lao Tse, and Mencius, the affairs of the kingdom did not go on very smoothly. By and by people began to whisper that a change was surely coming. Centuries before this, the ruler Yu had set up some brazen vessels with the name of some one of the states on each. It was reported that they had been seen to shake violently. Worse than this, a mountain fell into the Hoang Ho River, turned the stream from its course, and caused terrible floods. The central government grew weaker, the separate states stronger, and finally the prince of the state of Tsin became emperor. In 246 B.C., Huang Ti ascended the throne. He was only 13 years old, but in one way or another he usually succeeded in having his own will. The Editor. Before Huang Ti had succeeded to the throne, he had contracted an intimacy with the hereditary prince of Yen called Tan. When he was seated upon the throne, Tan paid him a visit, but was coldly received, which made him return to his own country with disappointment. On his return, Fan Yu Ke, an imperial general, having fallen into disgrace, had fled to Yen. The emperor set a price upon his head, but Tan refused to violate the laws of hospitality. Though Tan appeared very sincere in his regard toward Fan Yu Ke, he kept him at his court only with the view of revenging the insult he had received. A crafty man called King Ko was sent to Fan Yu Ke in order to acquaint him with the dreadful fate his family had suffered by the Tsin tyrant on his own account. "You," he added, "will very soon fall a victim to the tyrant. I advise you, therefore, to commit suicide. I shall carry your head to the tyrant, and whilst he is viewing it, I shall bury this poniard in his breast. Thus you will revenge your family, and the empire will be freed from slavery." Fan Yu Ke listened with attention. He was enchanted with the prospect, and cut his throat. King Ko hastened with his head to Huang Ti, prostrated himself, and presented it in a box to the emperor. Whilst he was examining it, King Ko drew his poniard, but the emperor perceived it in good time. He started, parried the blow of the assassin, received the wound in his leg, and thus saved his life. King Ko was in despair at having missed so good an opportunity of dispatching the monster, and again darted his dagger at him, which merely grazed the imperial robes. After having upon examination found out that the Prince of Yen had hired the assassin, he attacked Yen, drove the king out of his capital to Liu Tung, and not yet satisfied with having inflicted so heavy a punishment, he satiated his revenge to surfeit by exterminating the whole family. Constantly directing his attention to gain the one great object, universal dominion, he defeated all the machinations of the minor princesses by a steady course of policy, and they were all finally subdued. Huang Ti, who had before only borne the name of Ching Wang, as soon as he saw himself the sole master of the whole empire, adopted the title of emperor. Puffed up by his many victories, he thought himself by no means inferior to any of the preceding worthies, Shin Nung, Yao, and Shun. He therefore adopted the epithet of Che, beginning first, which he placed before the title of emperor. The imperial color was changed to black, and a regular system of despotism introduced. But he did not forget the improvement of his country. Astronomy, during the many troubles of the states, had fallen into disuse. He reestablished it, and published a calendar. Anxious to obliterate all the memory of sanguinary conquest, he ordered all the arms to be brought to his capital, Heenyang, and obliged his numerous soldiers to settle themselves in this city, where he endeavored to surpass all his predecessors in luxury and magnificence. The palace was tastefully laid out and enriched with the spoils of many kingdoms. But the ease of the court could not soften the prince. He visited all the provinces of the empire, made his own observations, and even penetrated to the great ocean. With scarcely any train, he traversed valleys and plains, always intent upon his duty. His vigorous mind was restless. He could not brook the reproaches of the literati, nor conform to their advice of introducing the old order of things. He wished to be a founder, not a restorer of an empire. Even in the prevalent superstition, he dared to introduce innovations and to offer sacrifices according to his own fancy. Being almost drowned whilst crossing a river, he inquired about the cause. The spirit of a mountain, which was pointed out to him, received all the credit. He therefore had the mountain laid bare of all its trees and herbs, in order to revenge himself for the insult. At another time he dispatched some young men and women in search of the islands of immortality, which he was told were situated toward the east. The adventurers were driven back from thence by a very heavy gale, and returned without bringing with them the liquor of immortality. But one of their number, who had been driven in a different direction, reported to the emperor that he had landed at the Isles of Immortality, where he had found a manuscript which stated that the Tsin Empire was to end by Hu. Hoang ti lent a willing ear to this impostor, and immediately resolved to attack the Hoang nu, or Huns, for these he understood were the Hu which would put an end to the reign of his family. The Huns, this scourge of the civilized world, dated their empire from one of the princes of the He dynasty. Their country was of great extent, situated on the west of Shensi, of which they possess the western parts, and their posterity still inhabit a part of that territory, the present El. They belonged to that extrinsic tribe which the ancients comprised under the name of Scythians. The country they inhabited was so barren as to render agriculture little available to the maintenance of life. Their indolent pastoral habits had for them greater attractions than the constant toil of the Chinese peasant. Hunting was their chief amusement, and next to their herds their principal means of subsistence. Without the arts of civilized life, they were cruel and bloodthirsty, desirous of conquest, and insatiable in rapine. Their victorious arms were only bounded by the Eastern Ocean. The thinly inhabited territories along the banks of the Amour acknowledged their sway. They conquered countries near the Irtish and Imaus. Nothing could stop them but the ice fields of the Arctic seas. Their principal strength was in their innumerable cavalry, which appears to have been very skillful in the use of the bow. Their march was checked by neither mountains nor torrents. They swam over the deepest rivers, and surprised with rapid impetuosity the camps of their enemies. Against such hordes no military tactics, no fortifications proved of any avail. They carried all before them with irresistible power, and never waited until a numerous army could be assembled to overwhelm them. Hardy to an extreme, they could support fatigue and hunger, and never lost view of the object of all their excursions — plunder. Hoang ti surprised and sought to extirpate these fierce barbarians, and finding them unprepared, the conquest was very easy. His generals having subdued the people in the south, nothing more remained to be done than to subdue these Tartars, or at least to put a stop to their inroads. Some of the northern states had eventually built a wall to keep those unbidden guests out of their territories. Hoang ti resolved to erect a monument of his enterprising spirit, which would be a lasting memorial of his greatness. This was the building of the Great Wall, which commences in the western part of Shensi and terminates in the mountains of Liutung in the sea, a distance of more than 1,500 miles. It runs over hills and rivers, through valleys and plains, and is perhaps the most stupendous work ever produced by human labor. He lined it with fortresses, erected towers and battlements, and built it so broad that 6 horsemen might ride abreast upon it. To lay the foundation in the sea, several vessels loaded with ballast were sunk, and upon this the wall was erected. Every third man in the kingdom was required to work on it. The enormous work was finished within 5 years, but the founder had not the satisfaction of seeing it completed. During these immense pursuits, the emperor was often interrupted in his work by the representations of the literati, who desired to restore ancient customs and revert to the glorious times of Yao and Shun. The emperor, fond of innovations, anxious to perpetuate his name by extraordinary works, was highly dissatisfied with their observations. Letzi, his prime minister, advised him therefore to put a stop to all similar remarks by burning the ancient books. Probably the emperor had made up his mind long before the matter came up in his council, but the following is what Letzi is reported to have said: "Your Majesty has laid the foundations of imperial sway, so that it will last for 10,000 generations. This is indeed beyond what a stupid scholar can understand, and moreover, Yu only talks of things belonging to the 3 dynasties, which are not fit to be models to you." At other times, when the princes were all striving together, they endeavored to gather the wandering scholars about them. But now the empire is in a stable condition, laws and ordinances issue from one supreme authority. Let those of the people who abide in their homes give their strength to the toils of husbandry, and those who become scholars should study the various laws and prohibitions. Instead of doing this, however, the scholars do not learn what belongs to the present day, but study antiquity. They go on to condemn the present time, leading the masses of the people astray and to disorder. At the risk of my life, I, the prime minister, say, formerly, when the empire was disunited and disturbed, there was no one who could give unity to it. The princes therefore stood up together. Constant references were made to antiquity, to the injury of the present state. Baseless statements were dressed up to confound what was real, and men made a boast of their own peculiar learning, to condemn what the rulers appointed. And now, when your Majesty has consolidated the empire, and distinguishing black from white, has made it a stable unity, they still honor their peculiar learning, and combine together. They teach men what is contrary to your laws. When they hear that an ordinance has been issued, every one sets to discussing it with his learning. In the court they are dissatisfied in heart. Out of it they keep talking in the streets. While they make a pretense of vaunting their master, they consider it fine to have extraordinary views of their own, and so they lead on the people to be guilty of murmuring and evil speaking. If these things are not prohibited, your majesty's authority will decline and parties will be formed. The best way is to prohibit them. I pray that all the records in charge of the historiographers be burned, excepting those of Tsin, that with the exception of those officers belonging to the board of great scholars, all throughout the empire who presume to keep copies of the Shi King or Shu King or of the books of the 100 schools be required to go with them to the officers in charge of the several districts and burn them, that all who may dare to speak together about the Shi and the Shu be put to death, and their bodies exposed in the marketplace, that those who make mention of the past so as to blame the present be put to death along with their relatives, that officers who shall know of the violation of those rules and not inform against the offenders be held equally guilty with them, and that whoever shall not have burned their books within 30 days after the issuing of the ordinance be branded and sent to labor on the wall for 4 years. The only books which shall be spared are those of medicine, divination, and husbandry. Whoever wants to learn the laws may go to the magistrates and learn of them. The imperial decision was approved. End of section 15. This recording is in the public domain.